You're now live.
We are now live, so I'm going to call the meeting of Senate Finance back to order. And today we are hearing from, if not all, most of the CUDs. We've got quite a list. I understand they have been asked to try and keep their testimony to about 10 minutes apiece. So we're going to start with Michael Rooney, and I don't know if anyone is prepared to answer this, but one of the proposals that came to us yesterday was that we start out with a state subsidy using ARPA funds to keep for income qualified families their cost to $25 a month, and that be phased out, and that a condition of federal funding is that the CUD would, or the internet ISP would have a low income program that would limit payments to $25. I'm assuming, depending on the makeup of your constituency, that might have more or less impact, but just wondering if anybody feels ready to make a comment on that, and if not, get back to us in the future, because that has been put out there on the table. So we're going to start with, I've lost my agenda. Okay, Michael Rooney from Lamoille FiberNet. Michael, are you with us? He has been with us. Okay, well, Michael's not here, so maybe we'll move on to Christine Hallquist. Christine is not here. Michael, have you joined us?
Christine is here, I believe.
I am not seeing her name up on the screen.
She's gone.
And Michael's name is on the screen, but in his picture, but I'm not. So I'm just going to work down the list. Sean, are you with us? And I'm not even going to, okay, Sean wins the lottery. And I'm not even going to try your last name because I am sure I would massacre it.
Cayo, Sean Cayo.
Cayo, okay. So the floor is yours. We're interested, I think, in a couple things. Where are you in your development? How long before you can realistically think about stringing fiber or providing service?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to get to that point? And we will go from there, okay?
Certainly. Yeah, I'd thank you for having us. We obviously appreciate the invitation. As I just mentioned, I'm Sean Cayo. I'm the chair of Northwest CUD. I'll start by kind of giving you a little bit of a timeline, back history of kind of where we started and some of our accomplishments. We were I checked yesterday, we are the newest of all the CUDs, or the youngest. We were created in August of last year. Through, I don't know, just a few weeks really after the creation in early August, we quickly grew to 12 communities. I quite literally was double attending select board meetings at times, trying to talk to all the member communities and walk them through the process and advocate for CUDs. We since then have collaborated heavily with Northwest Regional Planning. They, on our behalf, applied for the Broadband Innovation Grant to begin our feasibility work. They continue to provide us with some administrative support services. We completed a region-wide survey to further assess broadband need. We deployed 19 free Wi-Fi hotspots. We collaborated with Vermont Community Foundation to provide the libraries, our local libraries, a technology grant I think Rob had mentioned that earlier today as well. We've held several discussions with neighboring CUDs, including NEK and Lamoille, supervisory unions and electric utilities, to discussing, collaboration efforts and sharing resources. We've established our working groups or subcommittees for communications, project management, ops, as well as finance. We continue to apply for various grants for capacity building through VCF, USDA, public service, as well as EDA. Tomorrow's a big day for us. Tomorrow we will have our completed feasibility in hand. So we're excited. We worked with our consulting firm, our design firm, and they plan to deliver that to us tomorrow. So that's a big checkbox for us to have that completed. For our next steps, or what our likely our next year looks like, it's selecting our consultant for our business planning phase. Likely to hire a CUD program manager to help kind of with our day-to-day operations, as well as continue to foster our growth. Project plan our phased approach to our regional build out. At that point, we'll also kind of look at partnerships and what makes sense for us. Site surveys, make ready, which again will probably be in conjunction with partners in the area, and then preparing for phase 1 implementation, ideally by mid 22. Any questions yet?
Questions? Okay, so you are just at the beginning. What towns are you covering in Northwest?
Certainly. We have Alburgh, Highgate, Sheldon, Fairfield, Georgia, Fairfax, Berkshire, Enosburg, that's where I'm located, Bakersfield, Richford, and Montgomery. And we have had discussions with nearly every community in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Some communities like St. Albans and Swanton at the time, where we continue to have those discussions, we're actually on the agenda for their local boards here coming up soon. And some communities are kind of in a period of transition with local elections, and they have yet to join, but everyone's been invited to the table. We've had discussions. It's just at this time, we sit at 12 member communities.
Okay. Questions at this point? Senator McDonald.
Have you started construction of anything yet?
No, we are very clearly in the planning and strategy phase for us right now, because we are the youngest of all the CUDs. We through a lot of help. I know I've called Christine and NEK and several of the other CUDs to get some guidance on making sure that we're taking the right steps and learning. FX as well, calling and learning the lessons of CUDs before us, as well as continuing to speak with other operators, industry experts, a lot of the utilities as well, making sure that we are doing this as quickly as possible. One of the things that we've done over the last not quite a year yet is we've had a ton of discussions with potential partners. We've spoken with Vermont Electric Co-op, Green Mountain Power. Here in Franklin County, we have 2 VEPSA members, Enosburg Electric and Swanton. Industry experts like My Fiber Communities, Matrix Designs. So we're continuing to have those meetings, as well as operators. We've met and had preliminary discussions with Franklin Telephone, Fiber.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Not a problem.
You haven't started
Okay.
yet with your brainstorming. Thank you. Okay.
All right, I'm going back, if there are no more questions, to the top of the list. Christine is here. I don't know that Michael is. Rooney,
Senator
but
Cummings,
yes,
Michael Rooney is with us, but he's going to keep his video off so that he has enough
and
bandwidth.
talk. Okay, you're both from Lamoille FiberNet, and I don't know if you have a
Yes.
a presentation and how you've divided up the labor.
We've got it divided up. I'm going to take the first 3 slides, and Christine Hallquist is going to take the last slide, and I will share the screen. If you
Okay, thank you.
let me do that, and just have to get to that particular app. Well, let's try. Say that, and let's bring.
Something is up. Well, it's an email.
Yep, I see that. It's not relating to, that's relating to skiing. But just 1 second while I get, do it the other way. There we go. Now you should be able to see
That
it.
looks like it. Okay.
Yes. And we'll go into, there we go. That's a little better, I hope. All right, so as I said, I'm here and so is Christine, and we'll take these slides and hopefully leave a little bit of time for some questions at the end. Now, I think like all the CUDs, we were, we're fairly young to the game. We were founded in July of 2020 through the kind help of the Lamoille County Planning Commission, connected with Hyde Park, who had a shall we call it a fiber committee at that point. And now we've got in our CUD, we've got these 8 towns that you can see: Belvedere, Cambridge, Eden, Hyde Park, Johnson, Morristown, Stowe, and Waterville. It's a pretty good number of people, and we've got quite a lot of work to get done. So let's get on to that. Now, one of the discussions that's going on here is about cell coverage and whether BCBA should be part of, should be taking care of fiber and cell coverage at the same time. And I think the most important thing right now is to get fiber to the premise, both businesses and residential. But we can look at wireless after the FTTP goals are actually completed, or at least well structured going down the line. Anything that dilutes that focus today is probably not going to help us get to the point of fiber to the premises as quickly as we can, as we should. Let's put it that way. Now, we have a collaboration task force that is beginning to operate now to try and get the towns that are not yet in a CUD that border on our towns to try and join with us. And at the same time, they may not be ready to do that for one reason or another, but we can serve those towns on the borders through the legislative action that's already been taken. So we're good with that. Starlink. I wish Starlink was a little bit better than it has turned out to be so far. It's got some issues, but I had looked at it initially as a Band-Aid, albeit an expensive Band-Aid, but a Band-Aid that could have helped us quickly get some people going. I think at this point, we're a little bit still on the edge of thinking about that rather than just putting it together and saying, let's go with it, because all the things that we're hearing back from our various beta testers, so-called beta testers out there, is that it's not stable enough to really count on. And you'd be better off in the parking lot, which isn't a good idea anyway. Then public-private partnerships. We're already talking to ISPs to figure out what is a good relationship for our particular network, our particular customer base. And we're also talking with other potential partners, CUDs, as well as anybody that looks like they're already really stable in this business. People like Stowe Cable and Fiber and Maple Fiber, anybody that is looking like they're going to have spare fiber strands that we could work with while we're doing the rest of the installation. We're, as an organization, Lamoille FiberNet is, but with its mission, is saying we're going to both deliver to every 9/11 address and also to be affordable. And affordability is something really key to us. Okay, I'll turn it over to Christine at this point and let her take it from there.
Thank you, Michael. So at this point, I'll talk about what we're doing, boots on the ground kind of activities. Our business plan is complete. The business plan essentially says, there's 10,222 addresses that'll be served by overhead, and then about another 1,420 or so that'll be underground. Of course, the focus will be on the aerial and overhead first, because aerial and overhead, you can build for about 32,000 a mile, and it costs 72,000 a mile for underground. So you got to get to the point where you got some good revenues before you can start addressing the underground. But the total cost to service all the addresses, these are the overhead addresses, that's $37.2 million. And what we're looking at with startup telecom organizations like this, you really need to have a 60% equity, and you can borrow somewhere around 40%. So it's going to take some level of equity investment. And of course, we're looking for grants to fill some of those holes. Pole study is complete. Pole study was important in terms of being a foundation for doing your engineering and design. Of course, we're currently in discussions with potential ISP partners, as Michael talked about. And I'll emphasize that, Lamoille FiberNet is definitely looking to partner with ISPs, not get into the end provision business. I was listening to June Turney talk earlier today. I think we're right in line with the idea that we want to keep those local ISP providers in business, and hopefully they can gear up and have the organizational capacity to meet what's coming. We actually have a plan in place now to do a joint project. It's interesting, you'll be hearing me talk later. I'm also the administrator for NEK Community Broadband. And this has really been a discussion we've had all along, is how do we partner and share skills? And the idea is not any one of our CUDs can probably afford the specific engineering and technical skills that are needed. We'll share those resources. We're working closely with the other Northern Tier CUDs to look at things like geographic redundancy and resiliency. But our first project that we're planning right now with us as a joint project is in the fall. It's to serve Eden and Lowell. We'll start the engineering in the fall, 47 miles of fiber. It'll create a nice critical backbone that will help Lamoille Fiber get to some of the areas they're interested in, such as Belvedere. And this, it actually interconnects our system to their system, and then they'll help us get to Westfield, which is one of our communities. So, the next step is to fund the business plan and start construction on the business plan in 2022. So that, the emphasis, again, I think for Lamoille Fiber is to focus on, owning the infrastructure, but providing a resource for the ISPs to get to every address. The goal is to get to every address, and we're, holding ourselves accountable to do that. So at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, now I can see you. Any questions? Sandra Pearson.
Thank you. Christine, did you say that you can be about 60% leveraged? Was that?
No, I'm saying a startup at 40% leverage. In other words, you have to have
leverage.
60% assets, right? That ultimately over time, speaking for, being in this business a long time, once you get I'm talking about my experience as a cooperative, as a publicly owned infrastructure, you can set standards as 40% equity positions and 60% borrowing. And it makes sense when you're building long-term infrastructure, by the way, to borrow money, because you're really having an infrastructure that's going to last 40 years. So, why make your customers or your members up front pay for all that? That's by using low interest money over time. Everybody pays for it over time. Now, of course, if the interest rates shift dramatically, that philosophy is going to have to shift. Certainly if you were back in 1979, you wouldn't be saying this when there were 18% interest rates.
So let me just play with this a little bit so I understand it, because I think this is actually going to end up being central to our work here, because the hope is the state using ARPA money can help, with the upfront investment to, especially the CUDs. I mean, the challenge, I see a few challenges, but one of them is most of them don't have anything in terms of any built equity in anything. And so for instance, does it make sense, and this is simplistic, but that we help you with a grant, I think, for the startup to build one town or one region, one section in some way. And then, because once you've built that, we've heard this over and over from the EC Fiber folks, then you have resources you can borrow against. So is that sort of the concept that you'd like to see us pursue and filling that role? In EC Fiber's case, they went around to the towns and got people to give them startup grants, sort of crowdsourcing. But I'd like to help. I'd like you to help me understand if my thinking is somewhere on target.
Well, I agree it's on target. The problem with the EC Fiber model is it took a long time, right? What we need to do, I don't think we're in a situation today where broadband has become important as electricity, water, and sewer for business. So if you want to grow the economy, the faster you can build this out, the better you're going to be. And certainly with our COVID experiences, we've seen the downside of not having it. So yes, the EC model is a good model. Problem with the EC model, it takes too much time. For what I think Vermonters aren't going to be that patient. Certainly with the amount of federal investment coming, it could accelerate things dramatically. So this is a three-phased approach. First approach is an infusion of grant money. Then we leverage that money to borrow additional money to even build out further. And then ultimately, once we've established 3 or 4 year track record in terms of our financials, then we go to the bond market. So it's three-phased approach is how we would answer that.
Do you think one of the historic problems we've had is accountability of the grants going out the door over time in Vermont? We have not gotten the results that we thought we were paying for. Do you think the CUDs, because of their public kind of ownership model, handles that? Or is there a strategy the state should think about to make sure that, when you're giving out a grant as opposed to a loan, there is a level where you've got to let it go? And so I'd be curious what you think about those dynamics.
Well, I think that's, I think that's the genius of the CUDs, because the genius of the CUDs is it's local community folks holding you accountable. That is the greatest level of accountability. Living on both sides of business. When I worked, that's why the National Electric Cooperatives were so successful. Because I will tell you, my experience, I can't say enough good things about the board of directors I used to work for. Their focus was always about, build the infrastructure, make it resilient, and make it last, and keep the rates low. The community focus keeps your feet to the fire, and I think that's one answer. And then coupled with that, I think the VCBA providing technical resources at the state level is important. I'm actually talking about the REA basically revisited at the state of Vermont level. When you think about the REA and the build out of the electricity to all of rural America, the REA had all these technical specifications, and line workers and citizens could build substations because they basically picked up the REA manual, which, by the way, we're still using today in electric co-ops. They're called RUS manuals today. any line worker can build highly technical systems because they follow a set of standards that have been established. So I see that the role of the VCBA, provide the technical central support so the CUDs can be successful, and then the CUDs will hold the accountability. And of course, the legislature, as you're releasing funds, there's a level of reporting that you would want to ensure. But I can, I have faith that the CUDs, when operated properly under open meeting law with the transparency that it requires, will be the most effective way to hold those funds accountable for the goals that we're setting here.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Senator Brock? You're muted, Senator.
Well, Christine, good to see you again. I have a couple of quick questions for you. The first is based on where you are with your CUD right now, best case, when will you be done?
Well, I will tell you that the plans, the plans that I work under, and again, I've just started with Lamoille, so I can't necessarily speak for Lamoille, but what my recommendation will be is we build 5-year construction plan. We want to get this done in 5 years. And again, following that process of, identifying the 3 priorities being, what are we going to go first? We're going to go first to the areas that are least served. I've been encouraging to take the grant money and use that money to fund those areas that nobody's going to get to. When you get down to 6, well, first of all, if you look at cabled areas in the state, cable areas, it appears to me, it kind of has a break point of about 20 customers per mile. So below that, cable isn't quite interested because the business plan, and again, there's no criticism. It's just the business case isn't there. So somewhere between 20 and 5 customers per mile we can serve. Below 5 customer miles, we have to be very careful of because the revenues may not even support the operation costs. However, if that's part of the business planning you've got to do. Are we going to go out to the person in the most remote part of Warren's Gore? Well, maybe not. Maybe that's where the Starlink satellite's going to have to hold them for quite a while. But those are the decision points. We want to go for the areas that are least served first, with the exception of the person sitting out in Warren's Gore.
Well, that leads me to the question is that if it will take you 5 years to be done, and who knows, it may take 4 years to get to the person at the end of the Gore. Should there be, and should CUDs have responsibility for some type of interim or parallel strategy to get broadband to people sooner? And if so, can it be integrated with your fiber to the premises long-term plan?
Okay, so I've got to give you the official response for that, representing Lamoille FiberNet, which is, look at this, and I think it's a real issue. I mean, I understand the point that you're making here, or if you're trying to make a point, it is. There's a big debate in the middle there around should we provide some type of interim service, where the position of Lamoille FiberNet is, look, we got to stay focused. We got to keep our eye on the prize. And I agree that we got to have them keep the eye on the prize because, this is, building the fiber infrastructure is a huge job. And, like anything else, if you don't stay focused, then maybe nothing gets done. But I do, I should tell you that I'm hopeful. I'm a Starlink user and I get it. And I've got complex software that uses DSL's backup and all that. But I'm getting about 300 failovers a day. So Starlink today is not ready for prime time. That said, I hope it is, because that would be a good bridge solution, in my opinion, if it worked. But we're still chasing the holy grail here. The wireless solutions are really ineffective in Vermont. If you look at the propagation studies, we've got so many trees, 80+% of Vermont is trees. So we're in a real tough situation. Do we have a magic bullet for for an interim solution? I don't think so at this point. I'm hopeful that Starlink will get its problems cleared up, but I would tell you, I don't believe it's ready for that yet either.
Let me add to that Starlink's rates are not what you would call affordable either.
Oh,
Thank you, Michael. Michael, that's a great point. Michael is pounds that story, especially, you get out to these rural areas, $100, paying $500, I have the luxury to pay $589 up front for the dish and then $99 a month. I suspect that's not affordable for most people, but you've got some other proposals working on that.
Well, that again leads to the next question is, should CUDs at some point, particularly if they're up and largely fully utilized, ever be required to have a low income plan, such as the ones that AT&T and Verizon and so on have now?
Well, remember AT&T and Verizon, they're dropping at 20. If we were only required to serve 20 customers per mile,
Yep.
Sure, we could afford to have a low income plan, but we're serving low income areas. So the problem is you have to increase your rates to support that low income plan, and the low income people are paying for those increased rates. So I think the focus that I see from Lumile FiberNet is, look, let's figure out how to get into the market with very low costs. There's very low cost of entry, meaning can we get an entry rate that provides adequate service for under $50 a month? Mm-hmm. And I would say for those people struggling on the low income side, if you could give them, at least, if you can give them 100 megabits service for $50 a month, they're going to save money because they're paying for a phone line. They can get rid of that phone line because fiber is reliable. Mm-hmm. So they can get rid of that phone line. If they're paying for any type of entertainment service, they can get rid of all that as well. Because personally, I get all my stuff off the network. So ultimately, the average, even low income Vermonter is probably paying more than $50 a month for its combined communication and entertainment services.
Thank you.
Other questions for Christine? Okay. Keep losing my agenda. Okay, we're going to go on to Bill Moore from Otter Creek. Bill is with us. Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Senator Cummings, Madam Chairman. My name is Bill Moore. I am the chair of the Otter Creek Communications Union District. I prepared a statement I would like to read to you into testimony. Thanks to the legislation passed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated strains on Vermont's inadequate broadband infrastructure, the select boards of the towns of Brandon and Goshen voted to form the Otter Creek Communications Union District with an organizational meeting on July 31st, 2020. In the ensuing 8 months, our organization has worked to fulfill our mission to expand affordable broadband access to the residents of the Otter Creek Communication Union District. Work that we've completed thus far. Since formation, we've created a board, an executive committee, and have added 13 member towns. So we got Brandon, Goshen, and then we have Benson, Castleton, Chittenden, Fairhaven, Hubbardton, Mendon, Paulet, Pittsford, Poultney, Rutland Town, Sudbury, West Haven, and West Rutland. This week, Rutland City's Community and Economic Development Committee recommended to their full board of aldermen vote to join the OCCUD. We've worked with the Regional Planning Commission to receive and record our feasibility study that was funded by a 2020 Broadband Innovations Grant, and currently we're working toward development of the business plan. We've applied for and been awarded 3 grants, 2 Vermont Community Foundation grants, and a CARES Act funding. We've coordinated the identification of multiple hotspot needs throughout the Rutland region and shepherded the award of 11. We've met or spoken with the town managers or boards of many of the municipalities in Rutland County. We've coordinated contracts with the retention of legal services as well as website development services. We've coordinated the proposal and application for funds for the development of an outreach clearinghouse and case management tool for the coordinated identification of internet connectivity need and outreach to the public and dissemination of state, federal, and local resources to support this need. We created a market campaign that launched at the end of December 2020 and has already resulted in the pre-subscription of 147 OCCUD area households. The lion's share of the administrative work has been performed in partnership with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission by way of their super planner, Amanda O'Connor. The Department of Public Service has been an excellent partner in helping us to access federal, state, and private grant opportunities. The Vermont Community Fund has provided funding that will allow us to continue operations into this new year. Our work as a CUD has led us to the realization that many of the folks in our member towns have been frustrated with the rollout of broadband. The Outreach Clearinghouse tool that we work to develop is helping us to identify addresses that are most critically in need of services. When people learn that we exist, they ask about when they can expect to get services. They share stories, those similar to Sean Good, a resident from Pittsford. Here's some excerpts from a letter that we received from him in December of this year. We've been in this house since 2000. DSL becoming available 12 years ago or so was a welcome improvement over the dial-up we first had. But as infrastructure improvements have been made around us in recent years, we've been left out. The pole on my lawn is 1,500 feet from the line it branches off on the Fire Hill Road at the corner of the Blue Quarry Hill Road and Fire Hill. At the Forest Farm in Tom Pitcher's house, there's a Comcast fiber optic and CCI DSL at 15 megabits per second or more. Comcast told me it's $10,000 per tenth of a mile to bring the fiber optic to my home. So $30,000 total cost to me. CCI says I'm not in a priority area. With only 2 houses on my road, I'm guessing I'll never be on their priority list. Their service field technician, during one of the many calls we placed for poor speed, tells me he measures 15 at my pole. So despite my CCI bill saying I get 3 megabits per second, when I do a speed test, I range between 0.8 and 1.6 megabits per second. Worse if it's windy or rainy. We can't use any streaming services like Netflix or Amazon. Watching a 3-minute YouTube video takes 10 minutes because of constant freezing and buffering. Our 14-year-old son can barely do remote learning for 9th grade on the days that he's home. We have to disconnect every other device in the house, so his school-issued laptop is the only thing connected. And even then, he has to keep the video feature turned off and can only listen to his classes. It's an absolute travesty in this day and age and in this COVID climate. The high-speed internet has become almost as essential as any other utility service like water or electricity. I've been fighting with Fairpoint and then CCI for years about this. I cannot believe there's nothing they can do. Like they say, I'm positive there is. It's just not in their financial interest to provide service down my road because they'll never recover their costs. But I'm at the end of my rope. We're not out in the boonies. We are 3 miles off of Route 7, 3/10 of a mile off a road that already has high-speed internet. I hope the CUD is able to make some progress, but like I said, I have the sinking feeling our road will be the last in line. These are the people that we are fighting for, our neighbors and our friends in these communities. As the Economic Development Director for the town of Brandon, I worked with the select boards of Goshen and Brandon to create the CUD because I heard these stories over and over again from both businesses and residents. Even the idea that we could act as a clearinghouse for incumbent ISPs and advocate for our neighbor positions has given hope for the folks in those outlying areas that have been last down the line to get service because the numbers have, historically, not added up for the incumbents to provide service. The first quarter of 2021, our efforts have largely been focused around navigating the legal landscape to be able to queue up in-depth conversations with potential contractors and ISPs, as well as trying to keep up with the very fluid and continually changing legislative landscape, as having the ability to speak on this is the most critical point to bringing on new member towns and giving some degree of a timeline or even comfort to the region's residents. We're an executive committee meeting away from signing non-disclosure agreements with 2 incumbent providers. We want to ensure that we are not planning to overbuild any fiber connections, and that when we get to the point of building our own, that we build to specs that will allow for the easy transition when we identify network operators. Not all CUDs are created equal. The relative urban nature of ICUD, relative to the rest of Vermont, means that we need to work with incumbent providers like Consolidated Communications and Waitsfield Valley Telecom. And their approach with us has been fantastic. And the fact that we're a legitimate municipality with the very real possibility of forging a strong public-private partnership, I believe it gives us the leverage to work with them to ensure that we're all working toward universal access for our member towns. As we go forward, our next 12 months will see us navigating the waters of the municipal bond market, the RFP process around engineering and potential contractors and providers, fundraising, more member recruitment, implementing strategies outlined in our feasibility study, and much in the way of administrative work. With that, I would take any questions you guys might have of me. And let me remind you, I am not Christine. I do not have the background. So the questions that you ask, I'm a volunteer, but I'll do my best to answer them in a speedy way.
None of us are Christine when it comes. A lot of experience there. Okay, Senator McDonald.
You said you were 3/10 of a mile from broadband. What's the level of broadband that was 3/10 of a mile away?
So his, going back to, this is Sean Good, a resident of Pittsburgh, who's in our CUD. He was 3/10 of a mile away from the Comcast fiber optic.
Which provides what level of service?
That's 100 over 100 is what we're looking at for our fiber. Symmetric.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Might want to look at line extension grants. But if it's $30,000, they're not going to come even close.
And that's one person. I mean, this is like, I have half a dozen of those emails that have been sent to us since our formation of all of these different stories, independent of the people that don't even have that. When we looked at our feasibility study, was returned to us, in our phase one, a lot of our build out is these places that are tragically underserved, these places that barely have DSL or none at all.
Okay. Senator Hardy, and then I'll get back to Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. And thank you, Mr. Moore, for being here with us. I have a question for you. And I also, if Christine could weigh in on this too, because I missed most of her testimony, but you mentioned that you're about to sign non-disclosure agreements. And Christine, in the part of the testimony that I heard from you, you mentioned transparency. And we just heard from the commissioner about her opinion about the trade secrets language that's in the bill. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, Mr. Moore, what do you think about the sort of public information aspect of this, and whether, because you as a CUD, or CUDs are public entities, yet you're working with a lot of private companies, where do you see the line for transparency of public dollars and your relationships with these private companies?
That's a great question. So we've worked back and forth with our attorney to, navigate this tricky document that's still going to allow for the transparency that people deserve, but also doesn't expose the incumbent providers that are partnering with us to give us information about where they might be thinking about building or what their network capabilities are, whatever that ends up being, so that, again, we can work to not overbuild the same area. I guess that's, in the end, like, we're not going to be sharing their trade secrets, but I think people will be, I guess, informed about what they're doing, about where we end up building.
Okay, so you feel like it's I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you think it's an important tool, or
absolutely
not?
Yes. No,
Okay.
it absolutely is.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Again, there are businesses that are trying to make money or stay in good graces of their stockholders, and we don't want to get in the way of that. We want to partner with them and make sure that everyone's served.
Okay, thank you. Christine,
Yeah,
have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's it's part of the sticky wicket we deal with here. That those that are in the competitive business don't want to share their plans for good reasons, because but I think there's a break point in that. If you're over 20 customers per mile, you've got a competitive business. But in the rural areas of Vermont, we do not have competitive business. So for a lot of the networks I've been looking at are 6.5, 7 customers per mile with a take rate of 50%. It might be 4 customers. That's not competitive. So I think the CUDs, at least I could speak for the CUDs I work with, are trying to be as transparent as possible within the confines of the public-private partnership. It is a part of that sticky wicket we're going to have to deal with public-private partnerships.
So with the partnerships, you think the non-disclosure of trade secrets is important, helpful, or should?
Oh yeah, I don't think we'll get partners without it. We won't get private partners if we don't sign NDAs. So,
okay,
unfortunately.
Right. That's what I just wanted to hear, clarity on your thoughts on that. Thank you both.
Senator McDonald,
So
I've got you.
I was back to the question of the few houses that were off of the 3/10 of a mile or whatever from the 100 and 100. And then we went back to speak with Christine. I will say to Christine, who's been doing this for a long time, I don't know what the witnesses are talking about when they use the word partners. I don't know whether they're talking about a contract to do something, a deal that has been arranged between the one and the other for a certain rate. For example, to go back to being 3/10 of a mile from 100 to 100. Theoretically, the CUD could build out from the 100 out 3/10 of a mile or a mile and a half. But it's not dealing with a partner. It would have to deal with someone that made a contract with. Whereas if the CUD was going to build out, then the CUD would charge a CUD rate, which would be transmitted by the investor-owned utility. But we're not hearing about those things which what I've just suggested, which may be ridiculous. But everything is referred to as partnerships. And as committee members, we don't know what the witnesses are talking about sometimes. So if you don't say, enter into a contract to have this X company build something for you or lease their lines for yourself or whatever, we don't know what is being discussed. And I'm just, in receiving testimony, Christine, about partnerships, I'm not learning anything when that word is used, and I don't think my colleagues are either. So you've been doing this for a while, so I'm saying that to you. So.
Okay, I just, hopefully a lot of these things will be clear after the others present. I do want to, give others opportunities, folks, to speak. But that said, there's a system for how business works. Before you could even enter conversations, you got to sign an NDA. The NDA leads to what's called a memorandum of understanding. Memorandum of understanding leads to the contract, which is the partnership. So you really don't have a partnership till you get to the contract, but you don't get to start the conversation without an NDA. I hope that answers your question.
But what is the partnership? I'm getting the impression that the partnership may be as different as the individual CUD, that you may need different kinds of partners.
Contract.
I would assume the 3/10 of the mile, you just want to hook onto their cable or their fiber and run it that 3/10. But I've got all kinds of people that want to answer that. And I think I'm going to go through the list. And as we get to you, tell us what you mean when you talk about partners, because this is evolving very quickly. And we're not in this 24/7 like I think most of you are. So help us understand where you've evolved to as we go through this discussion. Mr. Moore, what kind of partnership are you looking for right now? Or is it different with every one of your towns?
So our towns are members. Our partnerships would be with the ISPs or the service providers. That's where our partnership or end of a partnership would be. And we've got a memorandum of understanding with the CUD to our south. We're looking to negotiate one with our neighbors to the north, so that we're not working against each other's interests. So yes, partnerships is a pretty broad term, but our partnerships with ISPs will be different than EC Fiber's partnership or Maple Broadband's partnerships.
Okay, so right now I'm gonna go through as we work down, and I've got Steve Huffaker next, and I know, Steve, you've had your hand up. So maybe you can chime in now and tell us what kind, yeah.
Okay, there's some other things I wanted to tell you about our background and so forth. But let's talk
No, I
about the
would
part-
just tell us first who you are, what you're doing, what's,
Okay.
where you are in development, and then help us understand what you're looking for in partnerships.
Excellent. So my name's Steve Huffaker. I'm the chair of Maple Broadband. Maple Broadband is comprised of basically 18 member towns for all intents and purposes. The entirety of Addison County is all those towns, with the exception of Addison and Virgins, are members of Maple Broadband, and possibly in the next week or two, Virgins will be joining as well. So we're, for all intents and purposes, Maple Broadband and Addison County are one and the same. We started about 6 months ago. We spent the first 3 months of our operation just getting our feet under us, getting a website built and doing all the other early efforts. The feasibility study that Bill Moore made reference to, we did that. All the kind of organizational efforts just to kind of do what we needed to do. And then beginning at the beginning of this year, we set out to interview potential operating partners. And I'm going to use that term partner advisedly because I'm going to poke a hole in it in a minute. So we interviewed a bunch of operating partners, entities that might help us accomplish our goal of delivering broadband connectivity to 100% of our member towns' addresses. So that ate up pretty much all of February, and starting in March, we made the step and decided that we were going to start working with a local internet service provider that has presence in Addison County to use them as our quote unquote operating partner. So what we're seek to do with them is execute an operating agreement. So I don't like the term public-private partnership, but it has been used extensively throughout this whole CUD effort, and I find it confusing as well. So for all intents and purposes, what we have is we're building out fiber infrastructure. We will be building out fiber infrastructure to serve our occupants of our member towns. And the only problem with all that fiber infrastructure, it doesn't do any good unless it's connected to the internet. And so that's what the operating partner does. So in our negotiations with them, we are seeking to develop a business model where they, as a private entity who have goals that significantly differ from our goals, that we can result in an arrangement where their goals are met and our goals are met, and those goals differ a great deal. We have to find some way to do this so that we can fund our effort. And so as a result, the structure of that agreement is not going to be a simple one, but we see it has vast potential for us. We see it as the way to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So that's the quote unquote partnership part of it. So I think the problem with partnership, as I said, is it suggests a level of a relationship that I don't think exists. Basically, I think probably most all of the CUDs need to execute an agreement with an internet service provider to whom they can connect their fiber infrastructure so that they can deliver the service. And the challenge is, again, that we've got a nonprofit on one side and we've got a for-profit on the other side. So finagling that arrangement, it's achievable. We're working with smart people, and I'm confident we can do it, but it's not something that we're going to be able to do real fast. It's the precedent has been set, so we know it's achievable, but it's going to have to be catered on a per case basis, depending on who the CUD is negotiating with. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. In terms of our current activities, that we're focusing largely on the The negotiations, discussions, they're early discussions with that local provider. We're also actively engaged in fundraising. I'm doing presentations in front of every member's select board to help them understand our progress. We're also asking each select board to consider contributing a share of their American Rescue Plan funds towards our efforts. At a high level, we're 6 months old. We've got a lot of work yet to do. The big challenge relates to the industry we're in, which is that there's barriers to entry. And the big barrier to entry into our business is you've got to spend a whole lot of money up front to get a good handle on what you're going to do, and you're not going to make a nickel on it. So we're going to be spending money for quite a while doing poll surveys and high-level designs and detailed designs and doing make-ready work. All that stuff costs lots of money, and we're not going to make a nickel on it. But once we start pulling cable, that's when we start creating revenue, and that revenue will help fund our effort. So it's kind of an early step followed by a later step. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, Senator Pearson, you have a question.
Thank you. Does help, Steve. And this is a question I have for all of you, but you've come close to, this is about the partnership, which I'm not sure why we call it anything but a contract, but okay. So help me understand, if CUDs are entering contracts, in particular with incumbent carriers, and you've now described to us, all of you helpfully, that you have non-disclosures that involves your knowledge of where they're going to build so that you don't overlap them, and presumably they learn where you're going to build. So if I'm consolidated, why wouldn't I be eager to contract with you, make sure I fence off the heaviest density, and leave you to, best of luck to you to pay for the scraps left behind, and we'll be glad to do the labor that you're paying for us for to get to those homes, and then once you're there, we'll subcontract for the ISP. So what am I missing? Like, how, when we come to incumbents, why would we believe that? What's their motivation?
Let's talk for a moment about a non-disclosure agreement. And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to give you my 2 cents on it. Maple Broadband, we're an open book. We're a public entity. All of our meetings or minutes are published on our website. We have no secrets. So there's nothing that our potential partner or operator is interested in about us today. On the other hand, that entity that's currently in a private enterprise, they don't want us to share with others information about their operation, what their margins are, and a lot of that kind of stuff. So that's at the heart of it, what matters about the non-disclosure agreement. Now, after we've started building, then we're going to have a customer list. And we don't want to necessarily share our customer list with our operating entity. So then the other side of the NDA works much better. But initially, the only reason we've worked an NDA with our potential operating entity is that they don't want us to broadcast to the world all about their operation, what their margins are, what their strategic plans are, and so forth. So that's the NDA. Now, on the other part of it is that there's multiple competitors serving our county. CCI, Otelco in the southern portion of our county is also providing service in that area. WCVT is providing in the northern portion of our region. And so one of our greatest challenges when we start doing the build is to try to avoid building infrastructure where it already exists. And we're going to do our level best to be smart about that. We don't want to necessarily overbuild. So we've got infrastructure, we're running cable down the same line that CCI is, and Comcast is running down the same line, and maybe Otelco is there too. terrible idea, especially since the subscribers down that line, they probably already have plenty good bandwidth. So part of our effort is going to be working with all the other providers, the private entities serving our county, and to do our best to get them to share what their plans are so that we can make smart decisions about what we're going to build and when we're going to build it. Still, bear in mind that our overall goal is 100% service. Every single address in Addison County we expect to be able to deliver that broadband service. So there's going to be cases where we might be overbuilding and deploying fiber where CCI is currently there, but they're maybe only delivering DSL service, which is kind of a poor man's broadband. And it's also a broadband that's not sustainable because it's being delivered over copper infrastructure, which is degrading. So it's a long answer to a fairly short question.
Well,
Did I answer your question?
But what about the at least let's call it a strange dynamic when you're basically contracting with your competitor, and if you're splicing up, I've heard you say that they don't, you don't want to duplicate efforts, so they're going to fence off, some neighborhoods. You're going to agree to that you're aiming to build in some neighborhoods. What's to prevent them from taking all the lucrative neighborhoods? I mean, that's where the history's been on this entire dynamic across the state.
Well, in the case of our current discussions with that entity, we started out with a memorandum of understanding, and it's very, very simple. It says Maple Broadband wants to deliver broadband service to 100% of the addresses in our member towns, and our partner, the potential operating entity, we know has the same objective. So we already have a shared goal. And then from there, it's simple to say, we want to work together to achieve that goal. And the devil's in the details, but essentially, we need to be carving up this real estate in a way that allows both of the parties, Maple Broadband and the operator, to achieve their goals. And then we're gonna probably want to put some teeth in it in some way to make sure that they're doing what they say they're going to do. But we desperately need to be as transparent as possible in our discussions with them, because it's going to be a long-term relationship. We'll be, at the shortest, our agreement with them will be 10 years long and possibly out to 20 plus years. So this is really all about establishing trust with them as we proceed. And again, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I did try.
I think we're probably going to schedule a whole session on partnerships, but Evan Carlson is running up against a time constraint, and I see Michael Rooney has his hand up, but I want to give Evan a chance to speak. And then I know Christine is also here from Northeast Kingdom, but so Evan, I'm going to give you a
jumping
chance,
right
and
in.
We'll get back to it.
Thank you very much, all. I appreciate it, and sorry to rush this. Well, thank you for the opportunity to chat. I will try to be as brief as possible in my presentation. So I've been here before. You've seen me, so it's not totally new, but just as a rehash, NEK Broadband has been working at this since 2017. Despite having formed last year, we have had volunteers working on the ground to try to form this CUD for quite a few years in a row. We're 35 towns now. We have plans to go to 55, potentially 57 if we include 2 from Lamoille County. And these are in rural communities that will never be served, or sections of the communities that will never be served by the competitive landscape. It's super important to understand that, because in just the discussion that was just had, none of these incumbent carriers are going to go to those areas, even if we show them all of our plans and all of our sensitive material. They're not going there because it's not profitable for them even to operate in that area. The legislature and the governor have made it very clear that the CUDs as organizations are the model and methodology that they think is going to truly bring universal service. We are not revenue driven. We're not. We don't have any shareholders that we're trying to appease. But our community's needs and are kind of at the core of all the decisions that we're making. And we have a belief that this connectivity issue is actually an equity issue more than anything. We are accountable to our neighbors. They're the ones that are going to know firsthand if we misallocated grant funds. We have 60 plus members of our boards who are going to see the decisions that we're making and are actively involved in the decisions that we're making about how to expend this funding. I don't know if you can get better accountability than that. Over the past year, CUDs across the state of Vermont put thousands of hours into the development of these communication union districts, and many of us are ready to build. And this is a lot of goodwill that has gone into the development of this, and we should not be taken for granted. The progress that we've made as a CUD and where we're at, we've conducted our feasibility study and business planning. We've defined projects for 21 and 22. Christine is actually going to talk about some of the 2021 projects that we're working on. We have grant applications submitted to extend some of the projects that we're actually working on. We are in discussions with the budding CUDs, as Christine and Michael Rooney had mentioned, about how to share resources and potentially ensure that we're best utilizing the limited capacity that we do have. We're finalizing MOUs with local ISPs. Ultimately, one of the major differences when we talk about quote unquote partnerships is for NEK Broadband, we will be working very closely. Christine will be managing all of this, but she will be helping facilitate construction crews, the engineering components. And then after our networks are built, we will work with an ISP who will actually do the drops to the home and manage the customer service, the marketing, the technical support, and ongoing needs of the actual in-home service. That is the major, I think, piece of information that I think people maybe have been looking for. We are not going to sign a single document and hand over everything to an ISP to manage it and control. We are planning to submit make-ready applications for a project that we're going to complete this year, utilizing some of the CARES funding. So that work is underway. And we have plans to contract with an engineer to be able to help support Christine to really define some of the final or some of the projects in the coming years and ensure that we have capacity in-house to be able to do that work. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Christine to be able to jump into some of these other elements. Christine?
Okay. Christine, why don't you go ahead? Wow.
If you look at that picture on the right, that's the area we're focusing on with right now with our
surrounding Montpelier.
Yeah, it's a big area. We're actually looking at 57 towns, even though we only have 35 at this point. Our goal is to really design for all the Northeast Kingdom and then a couple other towns. So, but phase one is the pilot project, which you can see the timeline there. I won't go into the details of the timeline, but we're planning on do that this year. Phase two is we're going to build our backbone and key connectors for that area, and we're going to work with the other CUDs in order to have geographic redundancy, which is important for reliability. And then phase three, we get to those last miles. We get to what I'll call the willy wax. The person that's living up there in Warren's Gore. Next slide.
Oh, sorry. Back one.
So this immediate project, I think this is I'll call it an Instagram moment, to take a look at what's happening here. This project is funded by a CARES grant, but if we just took the CARES grant alone, we wouldn't be able to go as far as we're going. What we're doing, if you look at that green area, that's a rural block development grant eligible area, USDA eligible area. So we're going for additional funding to supplant that network that we've already got the funding for. So, that's how we plan on building our assets. I talked earlier when it's about low mobile fiber net, using your assets to leverage loans. This is the first pilot project where we're going to do that, but we're getting that done this year. That's the point. We're moving. And by June, we'll have the plan on how we're going to do the rest of the 57 towns that we're looking at.
I think one other thing to note here is that this map and this project is a perfect kind of amalgamation of multiple different partners. There is GMP assets that we're going to be, or the subsidies that we'll be taking advantage of, as well as Velco fiber that we'll be utilizing to be able to go from one section of this project area to the other. And then we will string off of that into last mile areas. So really utilizing all of the resources that are available to us to get this project done and connect with as many addresses as possible.
Oh, by the way, let me also add too, and we're seeing this all throughout the Northeast Kingdom. This project, you know, it's looking at, I think it's we're looking at almost 200 addresses there, right? Half of those addresses don't have service today. The other half are under 4.1, which I think 4.1 is non-existent service as well. So that's another example. Everywhere we go, we're finding, and Rob Fish kind of kicked us off with that data. We're going into areas that really are just, for all essential purposes, unserved.
So that's all we got.
Any part of my COVID survival has been taking rides around sections of Vermont I haven't seen, and I have been through Concord and up in this area, and it is probably more moose than people per mile. It is very rural, and I could appreciate the challenges that are there, just going with it. So Senator Bray, I do see your hand. You have your yellow hand up.
It's not a bright orange hand, so it just disappears into the drapes. I'll have to fix that. The question we've been sort of adding to the list of questions, and I don't know who wants to take this on. So I'm admiring all the flexibility and ingenuity that's being, as people are building unique systems really all over the state. And I guess I have a longevity question, like where will we be in 5, 10, and 15 years? Like, are they, I just sort of worry that at this moment, they're running on a lot of adrenaline and community engagement, and how do they turn into things that just are sustained and run in the background like a utility, just humming away quietly? It doesn't require drive and fundraising and all that kind of stuff. Is that part of is everyone grappling with that question?
I think that it's an excellent question, if I may. It's something that I think we all have to address. One of the things that we talked about in the CUD Accelerator program that took place over the past couple of months was board capacity and being able to sustain this work in the long term. I think, one of the analogies that's used when talking about CUDs is waste management districts. Those are things that have sustained for many, many years. And so I think that we need to consider it as something that is going to look like that in the long term. Once this infrastructure is built, we're maintaining contracts with the actual ISPs that have a performance standard that they have to uphold to deliver reliable, affordable service, and other programs to be able to ensure that we're delivering what we need to for our communities.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. We have a model that I'm especially proud of, which is the rural electrification system, which started out exactly this way. You actually had, back in the 30s, you had volunteers setting poles. So we do have history of doing great things this way.
I do want to mention, I know this is a question that's come up a couple of times, is how are we going to look at affordability? And I think that, to Holly Grossner's testimony yesterday, we hope that we can work directly with the nonprofit that her and EC Fiber have helped establish to be able to define some of those programs and figure out how we can have long-term subsidies, but also being able to build that into the models as we are, starting to go to the last mile. Where can we kind of ensure that we can deliver that level of service?
Great, because between the work to be done to get going being somewhat close to exhausting, and then maintaining it. And then I don't know, just in the decade or so involved in this issue, I've seen the technology evolve so fast that it, makes me wonder, there'll be quite a bit of work required just to maintain and stay current and all the rest. So I'm glad you're all up for it, and thank you for jumping in.
Madam Chair.
Yep, Senator Pearson.
Senator Bray reminds me of a question, or makes me think of a question, and I say this as somebody who is coming across the fiber channels of Burlington Telecom, and some lessons to be learned, I think, in Burlington Telecom, and we'll overlook the then Public Service Board's draconian conditions as the city of Burlington set up that utility. But is there, and what would you think if we did include something, if the state and federal government and taxpayers are funding the initial phase of a lot of this operation, should we have some kind of fallback where we guarantee public ownership of these utilities?
100%. I unequivocally, yes. I think that honestly, in my opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of NEK Broadband, but I do think that it's so important for the state to have some ownership. We have, as a country, have dumped billions of dollars into broadband, and there is very little public ownership of infrastructure that is so vital. And I think that is something that we should look back on and, consult as we are making these decisions going forward.
So do we pair that with grant acceptance or something like that?
Again, personal opinion, I think that is an acceptable way to consider it. If a CUD fails, then the state retains asset ownership at some point.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry. I have to drop to another meeting, but I'm happy to answer any email or questions via email, and Christine is can definitely speak on any case. Yeah. Okay.
We understand.
Take care.
Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, we seem to have been establishing in the last hour or two that the CUDs are operating in areas where where the private for-profits simply will not go. That's was established yesterday with Holly Groschner. It's been demonstrated that they're not willing to go there. They're not interested in going to places where they can't make profits. And the question a moment ago was, how do these local areas grapple with the fundraising? CUDs, the one that is often brought up is EC Fiber. EC Fiber was not started with grants. It hasn't paid for its build out with grants. It has borrowed money from the very beginning. It didn't get gifts to start. And they have done it with borrowed money. So my question here that for the committee and for the folks that are testifying before us is, if there is money available to build out into areas that are underserved, we've heard the investor-owned utilities say they would like to have their share and to be treated equally in being given grants to build out into places that they wouldn't build out into. Should we, as a government and a legislature, given this problem, be giving grants to investor-owned utilities to build out, period? Should we? Or should we be, if we're going to give grants, give it to the areas where the investor-owned utilities will not bother to come to and are not interested in serving? Or should we treat them both equally as to be given grants. And I don't know, do we have any opinions on that from the people testifying before us?
Is that a question for everybody? Because I want to get through.
Well, that's a question we have to answer, Madam Chair. Thank you
Yes,
for
it
asking me
is.
to clarify. So help us reach this decision in the course of the remaining testimony that you give us. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll give everybody a chance. So the question is, should the ability to access these, at this point, ARPA grants, but federal grants, be allowed to investor-owned or for-profit utilities if they are willing to build out under the same term? They would do that 0.3 of a mile with their broadband. And I will leave it to you, Christine. You still have the floor.
Well,
If you want-
I'll just answer quickly. It's like, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. And the reason I say that is because what's going to happen is, you know, they'll bring that number, you know, I talked about 20 customers per mile. They'll bring that number down to 12 or 10 because they have to make a profit. They're responsible for shareholders. And that makes the rest of it even more challenging. So I would say would be a flood strategy.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking yes. Can I take that as, okay. I'm
Agreeing
getting
with
some,
Christine's comments?
I think so, yes. Okay. So I'm going to move on to Jeff Such. Jeff, are you here? There you are. And I probably massacred your name too. I apologize.
No, it's in the dictionary. People always overthink it, but
okay,
you use the word every day. Okay, I'll try to keep my background somewhat brief because we have some fun question and answers to get into. Love engaging in semantic conversations. But thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for letting the CUDs speak today. For the record, my name is Jeff Such. I'm chair of the Southern Vermont Communications Union District. My professional background spans both corporate IT and technology startups. So since becoming chair in the past month, I've found this experience to be especially applicable because CUDs are essentially startups, albeit in government form, and luckily for me, dealing with technology. So a bit of background, Southern Vermont CUD in the year since it's formed has grown to 14 towns. We comprise the southwestern corner of the state, primarily Bennington County. In the past year, using the CRF funds, in addition to amassing hundreds of gigabytes of geospatial data, while completing the following, we've completed a total of a quarter of all the pole surveys, which is a component of pre-construction work needed across our district in coordination with Tilson Engineering. We've also completed our state-sponsored feasibility study, which was conducted in coordination with our friends and partners at the Bennington County Regional Commission, RISI, and ValleyNet, which identified multiple paths to serving all residents in our district with future-proof connectivity. I do consider us somewhat lucky in that feasibility study was, I guess, contained what in a vacuum would be viewed as negative light. Our only dictated paths to viability are via partnerships with incumbents and/or neighboring CUDs. This concept of going it alone and building our network has, never really presented itself. Which I actually view as a positive because our focus has been exclusively on building the capacity to evaluate, negotiate, and affect the most beneficial contractual relationships on behalf of our constituency, namely in the form of public-private partnerships. And I look forward to in a bit getting into the semantics around that. I believe in one of the scenarios I'll lay out, it actually is the traditional definition, but remains to be seen. Along those lines, we are in active conversations with our telephone incumbent, Consolidated Communications. They're eager to reclaim their lost customer base. Not saying anything secret, even though we're under NDA. Although, like I said, I can't discuss much because of NDA, our end goal here would be to take their existing and planned investments, fiber investments in our district, and extend it to include the last mile. Senator Pearson somewhat towards the lines of questioning you presented, which again, I hope to get to in a bit. We've also entered a memorandum of understanding with our neighbors to the east, DV Fiber, and I know Ann's going to speak shortly, so I don't want to steal too much of her thunder, but DV Fiber has graciously welcomed Southern Vermont CUD into their RFP process, which may eventually be expanded to include both counties for both efficiencies of scale and to lower risk. But additional conversations along those lines, I'll actually just defer to Ann because she's going to present shortly. We also have an MOU with our neighbors to the north, Otter Creek CUD, also towards the end of a potential public-private partnership with an incumbent. We've been kind of jointly pursuing the possibility of a larger fiber corridor that spans Route 7 up to our north and neighboring counties. So those are kind of the three big strategic fiber initiatives that we're pursuing. We're also not immune to the fact that we have a role as local resources for emergency availability, as well as ongoing accessibility and affordability. We actually engage with all of the incumbents in our area, regardless of technology base, even if it's only for short-term mitigation purposes. For example, we eagerly engage with Comcast towards identifying potential line extension programs, as well as our local WISPs. Again, all this towards the end of identifying interim emergency availability for residents who just plain out lack it in the time it'll take us to reach fiber to them. Towards those ends, we're also under NDA with SpaceX, and we've identified a potential pilot program to deliver interim Starlink service to underserved households. After Monday's announcement and press conference, I've been in touch with Tom Evslin and looking to coordinate along those efforts. This might be the pilot program towards a larger initiative. There's a lot of caveats I would introduce if I weren't under NDA, but I think there's potential there, and I do think that there is synergy between any interim emergency availability efforts and long-term fiber build-outs and the CUD's roles as local community resources, I think, plays perfectly towards those ends. But on a strategic level, and to kind of wrap things up, I kind of see my charge as rapidly accumulating the internal capacity and the contractual relationships so that we're able to submit a rock-solid grant application to the state that eliminates any concern over risk. And this tactic and necessity applies to all potential sources of funding, not just public. I've raised pre-revenue capital before, and I can attest it is no easy endeavor. And so when you are a startup government with only a year behind you in experience, there are concerns over accountability. So we're looking to surround ourselves with as many known entities and industry experts as possible. We wouldn't be submitting an application in a vacuum. That would be a losing bid. We'll be submitting it alongside an existing ISP that has a track record in the state. Volunteers will not be making strategic decisions in a vacuum. Our chief advisor, Doug Dawson, has over 1,000 broadband projects in his belt. We have world-class municipal and telecom legal advice from Primer. We have financial controls that were designed and put in place by thought leaders from the most prestigious municipal auditing firm in Southern Vermont. Our business plan and financial analysis were conducted by RISI and ValleyNet, and we have been historically supported throughout the grant process and in many more ways than just that by our partners at the Bennington County Regional Commission. We are very lucky among CUDs in that our RPC also doubles as an economic development authority. So we're able to experience the synergies from that. So in short, our plan is to essentially throw so many acronyms and telecom powerhouses at state and financial bodies to remove any concerns over competency and accountability. Also, kind of limiting risk is our relatively dense population as far as CUDs go, 28 premises per mile, which is the highest among CUDs, and plus our project scope is digestible at under 700 miles, digestible and doable within whatever tight timeframes that are placed on infrastructure funds, which I believe should be a concern for, for all CUDs. And those are realistic timelines, even in light of expected labor and material shortages. So we're confident that the moment that you all are able to stand up the VCBA, the VTA, or whatever, I guess again, whatever other acronym you decide to throw together, that we're going to be in place to submit a relatively low risk, high reward application that will go to quell any concerns over public accountability.
Okay. Questions?
I'm sorry I blew through that. I wanted to leave some time for questions.
No, I think we appreciate it. One of the things about being last is I think a lot of the questions have been answered. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jeff, for your testimony. That was fun. I mean that. And I have a question specific. You mentioned your poll studies, and I know that everybody's doing these as part of their pre-construction kind of work. And we've had a couple of conversations. I was very proud when I learned about poll studies. I thought they were something completely different, and now I know what they are. So one of the questions that's come up is about whether that data that all of you are collecting, right now, a lot of it is proprietary data that some of the privates have and they're not sharing with other people. And it's a lot of work to collect all the data. So another question about sort of public transparency, should that data be centralized somewhere where it's publicly available, or would that be revealing trade secrets?
I don't think it would be revealing any trade secrets. It's certainly saving subsequent entities from having to do the same work. But as public bodies, at times we don't have the luxury of keeping things secret just because we want to make sure everyone else goes through the same pains that we went through. Ours, I don't believe ours has been made public yet. I don't want to speak for the board, and we would have to make a vote. But certainly in terms of sharing with the state and state agencies, so they have access to the same data. And just for larger public purposes, our district is not generally has erred on the side of transparency over confidentiality with our data.
Okay, that is good to hear. It seems to me that it should be something that everybody has access to and is just shared resource across the state. But so that's good to hear from you. Thank you.
Other questions? I have one. Senator Sirotkin, are you in a rocking chair or a boat? Because everything is, I'm getting motion sick if I watch you. You are rocking. Okay, you're also muted. I'm gonna move us on here.
I will stop rocking. I'm sorry.
Thank you. You don't need the chair being nauseous. Gonna move on to Ann Manwaring.
Hello, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate this. This has been very interesting for me, being on the end of the line here and hearing about the progress of all of my compatriot CUD folks. We all have the same mission, but we're all good Vermonters and we're pragmatists. And we will move forward as we find the resources, both not just financial resources, but energy and intellectual resources to get the job done. And I think that's pretty clear from listening to all of our compatriots. One of the higher level questions or that I've heard here that I want to try to see whether I could phrase in a way that might help you all. To me, one of the reasons that we can reach the last mile, as opposed to all prior efforts have failed to do that, is because we are municipalities. And as a result of that, we have access to municipal capital markets, which private sector entities do not have access to. In practical terms, what that means is that once we get a revenue stream that justifies our issuing bonds, we can do that, then we can do it again, and then we can do it again as we move out toward our last mile. The role that public financing or any upfront costs, whether we raise them privately through private investments or through the federal funding that is arriving on our doorstep, is to speed up the process through which we can get to the other sustainable loan and capital markets to move us on to the next steps. That's the framework that will make us able to be successful in this when efforts to date have not been successful in getting to the last mile. I don't know whether that makes sense to other people or not.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah,
Senator
Madam Chair,
McDonald has a question.
just,
Yes, Senator McDonald.
I caution us all to, when we use the word that the CUDs are municipalities, because most of the public but understands that municipalities have the right to tax. That's inherent. CUDs are in a kind of a peripheral sense that they're municipalities, and the organization has given investors like Wall Street and the bond market a higher degree of faith that they might get repaid. And the bill creating CUDs goes to quite an extent about talking about how they don't have the taxing authority, and the towns in where they're organized will not cannot be assessed for a CUD that fails. And Ms. Manwaring's is her. Just, we should all be careful of crossing that line intellectually. There's a subtle difference that ought to be recognized. However, her request for helping assist CUDs is perfectly valid, but thank you.
We are absolutely correct, Senator McDonald. We are special purpose municipalities, and the law is very clear. This is the model that EC Fiber used all the way along, again and again and again, to get to serve the last mile in all of their district. And it's the same model that we in DV Fiber are planning to use. And the capital markets are the municipal capital markets that we're aware of are well aware of the distinction around this special purpose municipality, but you raise a good point. But
EC Fiber.
I'm an old-time select person, so municipalities roll off my lips pretty easily.
EC Fiber adopted and joined and became a CUD in 2015 after they had lost in the bond market in 2008. So it's a recent. You also are correct.
Okay, we have EC Fiber coming on, and I think we'll let them speak for themselves.
So
and do you have any further testimony?
Yes, I do, and I'll try. I've submitted it in writing, which you all can see later. But let me just give you as quick an update as I can about where we are now. We began at town meeting in 2020 with 5 towns. We are now 21 towns in 3 counties, actively negotiating with additional towns to join our effort. Collectively, we have appointed 56 citizens as representatives and alternates. In addition, as Jeff Such mentioned, we do have a memorandum of understanding with our neighboring CUD, Southern Vermont. And we also have 2 towns that belong to both CUDs. And so, and Jeff is right, we have welcomed them into our RFP process, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Okay, let's see here. We understood really early on that our quickest way forward would be to partner with a private firm in what is referred to as this public-private partnership. And we began a learning process and development which enabled us to issue a comprehensive RFP on February 6th. We have received viable responses, and we are now doing our due diligence with each to reach an agreement that is consistent with our vision and principles. Our timetable calls for negotiations to be completed and contracts signed by the end of May. And even if more time might be needed to contract signing, we will still be able to do pre-construction, design, engineering, and pole make ready this year with a strong likelihood that we can deliver service beginning next year and reach all currently underserved locations in 3 years. Here's what is important to us now. We need substantial funding to get started that is consistent with the whole conversation we've all had with you. Let me just skip down here. In order to reach all Vermonters, public subsidies for eligible families will be needed, whether the provider is for-profit or not-for-profit. Affordability is as important for universal coverage as is construction of the infrastructure. CUDs are accountable to our member towns for results. We understand the needs of our communities, are in a good position to manage relations with private sector providers that are ready to partner with us to satisfy these needs. The funding, administrative structure, and target internet speeds proposed in H360 are the key to delivering on our promise most quickly, and will set us up to rely on the capital markets for future funding needs. So there's a little bit more in the written testimony, but it's available. And the other thing that I appended to my testimony was when we first started, we created a statement of vision and principles. And we are negotiating our contracts with our private vendors with those principles in mind. And I'll leave it to you folks to take a look at them. And I don't think they're very different than the same principles that are guiding all my fellow CUDs on their paths. And one other thing we haven't talked a lot about here today, and that is the role that the Public Service Department has played in keeping us and sustaining us in our year-long journey from beginning to where we are now. On so many levels within the department, specifically and regularly Rob Fish and Clay Purvis and the commissioner herself, and all the other support parts of the Public Service Department who have provided mapping assets and all the other kinds of technical things that are really important for our work to be done. And specifically, and this kind of goes to the point that Senator Hardy was asking, and that had to do with the role of data. An enormous amount of the data that makes a difference in how we move forward comes right out of the Public Service Department. It isn't stuff that we in our world in DV Fiber consider necessarily proprietary. Where we're going to go with that data is proprietary, but the fact that we have the data that counts the served and unserved addresses in our community, that's all out of the Public Service Department and their data as refined by us as we walk down our roads and look at it. And one other point I would like to have you keep in mind, and that is the concept of towns versus how we roll out fiber. When we start down a road to roll out fiber, the fiber does not know when we've crossed the town boundary. So in our 21 towns, our initial most underserved phase 1 towns, 6 towns, are some of the most unserved towns in the state. But once we get beyond that, most all of our member towns, including my town of Wilmington, are well served for large portions of their providers with other cable or fiber services or wireless services. But all of them have pockets. And to a great extent, those pockets are adjacent on the same roads that are going down an underserved town. And so the line can just keep going down that road into an adjacent town. So the thinking changes a little bit when you start the engineering to roll out a line. It's no longer towns, but it's the road that you're going down. Be happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions at this point? Okay, thank you. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Thank you, and for your testimony. You mentioned the important role that the Public Service Department has played in getting you all off the ground, and I appreciate that. Thank you for giving them a shout out for their work. And we're looking at two different bills that would create different structures for getting out, continuing this work. But there's the obvious third option is to just stick with the Public Service Department and give them more resources and infrastructure to do so. Do you have a personal opinion on one of those three options as being the best?
I do.
What is it?
Well, I believe the structure in H360 gets the closest to what we CUDs will need in order for us to be a successful model. Though we are municipalities, special purpose municipalities, we are operating in a competitive environment. And so to a certain extent, we're also startups. So we're going to need administrative support in a way that the other models can't provide us quite as well as I believe 360 can. That's one thing. Also, the minimum standards of 100 to 100, I think, are very important, and that is present only in 360, and it is not present in the in S118. So those are two reasons. We're going to need some fenders as we roll down our competitive world. We're going to need fenders.
Thank you. I will keep that image in mind.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on to Jeremy Hansen. Jeremy, your name's been here since the beginning, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And if I could share my screen, let me do that. Oops, this one. Okay, I'm hoping that you all can see that.
Can you make it a little bigger?
Maybe.
Okay, if you can't, it's fine.
How about that?
Oh, that's very big. Okay, that's great.
Okay, so I'm gonna sort of present some of this material, and then I'm going to sort of meander through answering some of the questions as I've been taking notes this whole time. It is one of those luxuries of being one of the later folks to go. And I also want to apologize in advance if I drop off. I am here on a Starlink connection right now, and unfortunately I had a 40-minute dropout during Commissioner Tierney's testimony. So if I disappear, I will hurriedly reconnect through my phone and see if I can make that work. But so as a side note, Starlink is really good when it's on. It's not ready for prime time, capacity issues. I had an embarrassing moment where I was teaching a class to my some of my college students, and I said, all right, folks, I'm finally going to be on a connection where I'm not going to drop out. And literally 5 minutes later, I dropped off and I had to connect through my phone. And I felt really foolish. In any event, I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm the chair of CV Fiber. We're primarily in Washington County, but also in Lamoille and Orange counties as well. We have 20 towns. And like a lot of the other CUDs, we have thousands of volunteer hours in. We were created back on Town Meeting Day 2018, and essentially created with the motivation to follow EC Fiber's model. And that is, if we're talking about partnerships, a partnership with an operator. So we would pay to have the infrastructure created, and we would pay someone to run it for us, but people would send their monthly subscription checks to CV Fiber. CV Fiber would own that infrastructure. And those partnerships can have different shapes just based on the needs of the various communities. So it's not surprising to hear that different CUDs are going at this in different ways. So touching on what Senator Pearson said before, Consolidated Communications is building fiber in our district right now. I mean, I've had to drive around their construction trucks. I'm sure, Madam Chair, you've probably already had to do the same in Montpelier and thereabouts.
I think they're on my street.
There you go. But I think Senator Pearson's right that Consolidated is probably doing what he's saying, where they're going to go after the choicest neighborhoods. And then I don't know that they'll necessarily want to leave the rest to us, but we are, we are prioritizing going to the least served areas, and those least served areas are in fact consolidated DSL locations for the most part, consolidated and some other providers. In any event, so where we are now is that we have 4,730 premises. And actually, this could vary depending on how you're measuring it, with less than what we would consider modern 100-100 connectivity, and then about 2,500 with less than 25.3 in our 20 member towns. We've completed our fiber to the premises feasibility study and the business plan that was completed last year. And we've been essentially doing planning and moving forward based on those findings from last year. And one of the things that we're most excited about is the MOU that we're signing with Washington Electric Co-op. They are likely going to be helping us in a very, very big way and doing some of the construction for us, and then allowing us to use the excess capacity of what they build. And then when we will be building fiber, they will be getting access to enough capacity on the fiber that we build so that they can serve their members with that. So along with that, because Washington Electric Co-op extends beyond CV Fiber's boundaries, we're also working with NEK Broadband, EC Fiber, Kingdom Fiber, ValleyNet, to make sure that all WEC members are served in a sort of a rational approach that doesn't leave anybody out. Our goal is 100% coverage, nobody left behind. And this is something that I believe that for many reasons that other folks have mentioned previously, that this is the accountability piece that a CUD can provide. So we are accountable to our communities, and we will be pushing until every last person gets modern connectivity. So, and I would say, while I'm sort of meandering through this, I think we really need to focus on broadband, and I think looking at cell coverage, I think that can come later, but I think broadband is probably the more pressing issue, and it's also a support that can lead to better cell phone coverage. If you have fiber everywhere anyways, adding some additional microcells is not that big of a stretch, or adding a big tower even is not that much of a stretch if the fiber is already there. So we've been in discussions with our member communities to help supplement some of our phase 1 projects, which I have a little bit of a chart down here for a rough sketch of how we're working through our next projects. And we're also looking at a couple of Chittenden County towns and Waterbury potentially to expand the CUD to the west. We'll be imminently signing contracts with 3 contractors probably this week, next week, for doing pole inventory services, and those will commence essentially as soon as we have the funding to do so. Where we're going to be soon. So with CARES Act funds, we have some smallish projects, altogether 200 premises to be completed by the end of this year. So there's a smallish project in Roxbury Northfield, one in Moortown, and then one in East Montpelier and Calais. Beyond that, and this is not currently looking at any additional funding sources. This is something that we've had in our plans for quite some time, using the $400,000 of state matching funds, also out of the CARES Act funds from last year. We're essentially waiting on that. So the sooner the better that can get unlocked and released to us would be better, and using that to then leverage the $4 million VITA loan. We're moving forward with that, and we'll do this whether or not we get subsidies. Obviously, subsidies will make everyone's monthly bills cheaper. And I think with the subsidies, I think going below $50 a month, like somebody else said earlier, I think is perfectly reasonable. And I think we would be amenable to figuring out a way to make sure that folks who need the subsidies, who can't afford the $50 a month or whatever, can make sure that they get service regardless. So I won't go through the specific breakdowns of the projects, but this is sort of an aggressive schedule for what we're hoping to do over the next probably more like 3 years. So going back to So the conversation about trade secrets, should the data that's collected be made public? And I think that yes, it should be made public. I think maybe while we're using it, while it's still a competitive asset, we should probably not. We should probably not necessarily share that. That could be a trade secret. And I think the provision that's right now in H360 should allow CUDs to maintain trade secrets that we don't want to share with our potential competitors, because we are both a public entity and a competitive entity. And so I'm not particularly worried about, not really interested in collecting proprietary information from the other incumbent providers. So this is about our proprietary data being used by others. So if there's public funding, I think these should be public assets. In the same note, in the same vein, the fallback if a CUD were to fold for whatever reason, yeah, I think we should guarantee public ownership. That should revert to a public entity. It shouldn't, it shouldn't be possible for it to fall into the hands of a private entity that could take, massive public investment and use it for private gain. So some of my observations here. So the funding from the towns. So we're asking for some of the town funding that they're getting to drive down these monthly subscription rates. And for the most part, when we've talked to select boards or members of select boards, just kind of floated it out there, they've been pretty receptive, and they've seen the value of supporting our project, which is imminent. So because we don't have access to that that $400 of matching funds here just yet, we're going to rely on the towns that will be very quickly getting some funds from the federal government to cover the cost of the pole survey, and perhaps even into a bit of the design and engineering for our phase 1. What else do I have? So there was a question about a 5 or 10 or 15-year forecast, and what does this look like? What does CV Fiber look like, or what do the other CUDs look like in 5 or 10 or 15 years? I would say look at EC Fiber, because they have had, it's been years since they've had 2,000 subscribers, and they will eventually build out their entire network. And how they look then, I'm not sure. But honestly, the more people sign up, the more people that are helping to pay off any debt that might have been accrued, the cheaper it is going to be for everybody. We don't have any shareholders to please. It'll just be a matter of bringing in revenues to cover existing costs. There was a specific question about grants to investor-owned utilities. Should grants be given? And I think Christine Hallquist responded to this, and I would echo that. No, I mean, we've done this before. We've gotten some good out of it, but in terms of where we want to be, that sort of 100% coverage by 2024, I'm not convinced that it would do much. Honestly, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. I wouldn't have bothered to do, to take the effort and create CV Fiber many years ago and start all of those meetings, had the incumbent providers been able to provide fast connections or reliable connections. That would just not, I wouldn't have been as motivated. But when I was on the select board, I heard from so many people who had a similar experience to what I did. Just before I wrap up here, so with $20 million of funding and WEC partnership, we can essentially have everybody covered. So the partnership with WEC, again, is something that we're very, very pleased about, and something that we think is going to it's going to ensure that we're going to be successful, because we have the WEC board behind us, and we have the WEC membership behind us, and we're both entities that are committed to public service, that are committed to building this infrastructure and making sure that people get this necessary resource, this necessary infrastructure, so that they can participate in the modern world. So I'm not going to go into the details about all the tidbits of H360, but suffice it to say, CV Fiber does support the vast majority of what's in there. And that's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator McDonald. I can't see you, so there we are. Okay.
The witness talked about hooking up with in Northfield and Roxbury area. What was the level of service that was provided with that hookup?
That'll be fiber, and that will be in conjunction with EC Fiber and ValleyNet. There is some fiber already nearby through EC.
Yep. You've answered it. Thank you very much. Full disclosure, the witness is I live in Orange County. I am not in EC Fiber territory. I'm in CV Fiber territory. Eager to see you.
We'll be there.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So I'm going to take us on to FX Fin. And welcome. It's Flynn.
Thank you very
I
much.
can't see it that distance. Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings, for the opportunity to come and speak with the committee today. I just had to put together a deck. I'm sorry. I'm going to share it with you. So the question in front of us is EC Fiber. What can we do now? What are we up to? So, our mission is to build out world-class broadband to everybody on grid in our 31 town district. We're finishing our original 23 member towns. We are in the process of designing 8 new towns that we admitted last year: Topsom, Newberry, Washington, Corinth, Bradford, West Fairleigh, and Windsor. Construction in the new towns will begin later in the year, obviously not in all of the towns at once, but it'll get underway. We presently have 6,000 customers on about 1,400 miles of network. And at maturity, we'll be passing 31,000 premises. And I think we'll have something in the neighborhood of 15 to 18,000 customers on the 2,000 miles of network. I expect that we will be finishing up with that sometime in 2024. And at that point, the business operation will simply be about delivering good service, encouraging more people to connect with us, paying down our debt. And I believe that we will, over time, be able to continually offer higher speeds at increasingly lower cost. So when we talk about what the EC Fiber territory is going to look like in 30 years, it's going to be very hard for anybody not to be subscribed to EC Fiber, because it will just be hands down the best deal in town. And you think about the economic benefit from that in this part of Vermont, and you replicate it in the rest of Vermont, and I firmly believe that it would flip our economic story 180 degrees. Now, there's a lot of talk about what's our secret sauce, and there's a lot of talk about different partnerships and such. I want to say that the East Central Vermont Telecommunication District owns but does not operate the network. That myself as the chair of the governing board and the members of the governing board, they have zero involvement with day-to-day operations. The same way that a select board in any town manager town has zero involvement in day-to-day operations, or should have zero involvement. Yeah, we're fortunate to have ValleyNet as an operating partner, and it is a nonprofit ISP dedicated to rural broadband. But that's not the defining factor that makes this work. really, it's the fact that we can access the municipal bond market because we are now funded completely with long-term, low-cost capital. There's been some discussion about private-public partnerships in the local telcos, and that's one of the discussions that's going on. I think that the way that H360 frames it now acknowledges that there are going to be public-private partnerships, and it makes allowances for the local telcos and the CUDs to work together. And it even makes provisions where there are towns that are not in CUDs that have local telcos. It's got some provision in there for them as well. So we need to, I think, keep that in mind when some of these discussions come up. And I want to say that personally, looking at what is going on in the towns immediately to our south, I know that you've all seen that map. Rob showed it to you earlier. I've showed it to you in the past of where the lines of fiber are, that in between the blue EC fiber lines and the red VTEL lines, there's a little gap. Well, that gap are 4 towns covered by TDS. And they've expressed an interest in investigating what some kind of cooperative relationship would be. At the governing board meeting next week, I intend to give a new charge to our expansion committee to look into this. And there are lots of different ways that it can be done. And so the state's interest should be seeing universal reach of fiber to the premises and accountability. And I want to highlight that that this is a map where we see the telephone exchanges. So this area is TDS Perkinsville. This area is TDS Ludlow. The salmon colored area is Consolidated, and the blue area is VTEL. Now, these are all phone companies, so they had to have telephone exchange areas with boundaries. So in terms of Weathersfield, if they're going to get fiber to the premises throughout the town, well, they've already got it where VTEL is. TDS would like to do it. CCI would like to get rid of copper and convert everything to fiber as well. All the telcos want to do that. It's just that Vermont will be at the very, very, very tail end of what they do. In the same way that Vermont was at the very, very tail end of electrification. 1964 for the last farm, that's over 30 years after the prospect got started. Well, it was about 10 years ago that the telcos, maybe 20 years ago, that it became evident that the telcos had to switch to fiber. And really, it's only in the last 5 or 10 years that we've started to see that nationwide. So on that model, I would predict that by 2045, CCI will get fiber to the last farm in Vermont done. So that's why we need to have the CUDs focused on doing it now. And by now, I mean we're going to be substantially done with this in 4 years, 4.5 years, and we're going to be completely done with it in 6 years. With the amount of money that is coming from the federal government now, all of the CUDs will be able to get operational. All the CUDs will be able to get to the point where they can access the municipal bond market, and we can get this done. So affordability. Now, EC Fiber, starting in April of last year, has had this informal program of supporting families with students who just couldn't afford it. And it's very odd. It's very ad hoc. So we realized that we needed to figure out a more formal way forward. And in fact, this tied in with board level discussions about, what should the district be doing with its network. And one of the ideas was we had to find ways of subsidizing people who simply couldn't afford it and desperately needed it. Well, the pandemic just woke everybody up. and really put a charge in figuring that out. What we found was that, as Holly told you yesterday, this is a social services delivery challenge. And we cannot hire a staff of social services workers or contract with the capstone agencies and things like that, because that all puts costs into our model, and we can't have those costs in our model, because that puts the financial results that our bonds require at risk. Okay, we have to generate a surplus 1.25 times our debt service, and right now we're running about 1.4, so that's good. So we have something of a surplus, and so we donated $100,000 to a newly formed Equal Access to Broadband. And I'm full disclosure, I'm on the board. I'm the secretary of that corporation. Stan Williams, who you all know from ValleyNet, is on the board. He's the vice chair to Holly. So this is very much an effort that we have been working on, and we've been working on it because in a time when we had no idea that there would be any possibility that the state could entertain making grants of millions of dollars towards this kind of effort. This was all going to be completely kind of self-funded, funded from donations from national philanthropy, funded by donations from local philanthropists and businesses. So now with this concept that, oh my God, there's all this money, well, let's just ask the state for, $27 million, and then we'll figure out how to spend it. I got to tell you, we have been figuring out how to spend it. So, and we can't just offer $22, and you can't tell the CUDs that get money from the state that you have to offer a plan at a certain level. All right, because it's really expensive to build fiber to the premises in rural Vermont. And our lowest rate for 25 over 25 is $72. And if we were required by law to offer a $25 plan, our higher speed plans would have to be far too high, even in those pockets of prosperity in our district. And so we could never get started. The models would never pencil out. And I really got to emphasize that for CUDs, particularly for CUDs that are aiming to get to the municipal bond market, the balance between the cost of construction, the revenue you're likely to get, and therefore the prices that you're charging, all of that goes into a pot, and it's pretty delicately balanced. And that's true because it's really expensive to build fiber to the premises in rural Vermont, which is why nobody really wants to do it. So what's the future of affordability? So I believe that the model that Equal Access to Broadband is developing, and the pilot program that we're going to stand up is going to be successful, and it's going to be easily expanded beyond just serving the students in our district. And I believe that EAB will wind up being a designated agency that provides tools to social service workers statewide, that connects clients statewide with whatever the best service is in their area, and can coordinate the supply of devices and training, the broadband core, and we can start this right away. And I think that service providers will get $22 or $25 from the customer, and they'll get the rest of the money from another source, either from the federal government's $50 a month program, or the expanded Vermont State Broadband Program, or a pool of privately donated funds that can be tapped for those reasons. And providers like EC Fiber can donate toward those private funds. So I think there's your there's your future for affordability. And that's a model that all of the CUDs can tie into, and is kind of our own homegrown answer to the types of programs that are offered by the national providers, which also leverage these federal and state sources as best they can. So again, our goal, world-class broadband throughout Vermont, everywhere. This is going to solve the next broadband crisis. We think we have a broadband crisis right now because we have people out there who only have DSL or who don't even have DSL. In 10 more years, the crisis will be, cable's not good enough. I got to have fiber. So we can solve this all right now. And we can make Vermont a place where anybody with any business can come and live anywhere in the state and get going. And I think that last year I came and I showed you this slide, and it said that it was 360 million to do it. So the 150 or the 225 million, that's simply not going to do the whole job. And so we have to think about this money as money that primes the pump and gets the CUDs to the point where they can access the municipal bond market and finish the job. And I don't know the right way to do that. I don't know if it's making grants. I don't know if it's making loans. I don't know if it's a mix of the two. But I will say that we're going to have, a year or so for all of that to get sorted out. And when we do give money, it ought to be with strings that say something like, we can turn this into a loan, or we can forgive it and make it a grant. That there's got to be some flexibility as we start putting this money out early, because we want to keep our powder dry for the long haul. I think you know what world-class broadband is. And finally, Vermont really does need to find its own way forward. And so it seems to me that the H360 approach of standing up a community broadband authority that would be focused on broadband would be a good thing. It'll minimize duplication of jobs across the CUDs in terms of, I think, legal work, financial work, technical work. It can all be consolidated at the state level, where there can be an overview of what's going on, and we can really have a statewide strategy that's being implemented, leveraging this new type of municipality that we've created in the state. And also, if you think about what it's going to cost, if we go out and we hire all those people for, 7, 8, 9 different CUDs, and you multiply that cost and you compare it to simply having a core of professional contractors who we're going to have to pay top dollar. I think that the going with the core and even paying a premium is still going to be less cost than expecting each CUD to have their own staff that way. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this to you today, and I thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? You've got to holler, I can't see you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator McDonald.
FX, I have characterized EC Fiber's efforts as being exclusively with capital that was raised locally and not with grants. And I think I was in error, because there was a period when you were getting some grants for connectivity here and there, maybe 5 or 6 years back. But EC Fiber in a rural area has been successful by raising its own money and paying its expenses. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it is correct. And I would say of our first $8 million, there may have been a few $100,000 of connectivity grants. And we certainly have to count the Orange County connector dark fiber that the VTA made available as probably worth $1 million. But it wasn't, an actual, I don't know that we would have built that way. So it's kind of questionable. But I would say, basically we were pretty far along on our own before we saw any kind of government assistance in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Madam Chair, because it has been said that that the investor-owned utilities won't go into the places that EC Fiber has gone into, and they have done it with raising local money.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the key to getting rural areas, not waiting around for the investor-owned utilities to decide that suddenly it's in their interests. Thank you.
Senator, can we just cede the point that investor-owned utilities don't go where they can't make a profit and let it go? That's a given. We cede the point.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator Pearson and then Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you. It's so optimistic to hear everybody today, and I am generally quite optimistic. But I guess I'm wondering that the House bill contains some sections about workforce, and I don't pretend to know the details. But shouldn't we be concerned that all of you have basically laid out a pretty similar timeline and are, suddenly we're in a world where the upfront capital may not be the challenge? How how do your plans all layer on top of one another in terms of thinking about workforce? There aren't hundreds of people who can do this work just sitting around in Vermont. And unlike, as Christine told us in the old days, we're way too litigious now to just have volunteers string wires and get up on trucks. So unfortunately, that's not going to be an option. How do we think about that? And how have you all been thinking about that?
Well, we're in the great position of being a going concern that has already contracted for materials and labor to get us through, into next year. So we're okay, but it's a huge challenge. And back in late June of last year, people were raising the alarms with with the state college system and the technical colleges, and I have to tell you, I was personally thunderstruck by the lack of response. That there was not, people were not jumping all over it and saying, oh, that's obvious. And so we've really lost some ground there. And I think you're right to be very concerned about the future. And I would like to see nothing more than full court press on the whole issue of workforce development, because we are talking about really good, really well-paying, pretty interesting jobs and jobs that should especially appeal to young people who enjoy being outdoors. And I would say that, we should have no lack of people wanting to come and do it. I don't know who can get out there and sell this idea. It's not me, but somebody needs to get out there and do it. Representative Rogers in one of the HET meetings made a really great point that nobody had come in when she was in high school to talk about being linemen or anything like that. That certainly this is an area, where women can certainly, do the job. I mean, we have a great head of our outside plant operations, Danielle Mumma. And, you know, she came up through the ranks, and she really knows her stuff. And she's been absolutely central to our success. Well, now we need, you know, now we need 9 people like that. There's no reason why they can't be all women.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, because, you know, my gender sensitivity kind of started somewhere around 2015. And being, you know, the CEO of an electric utility, you know, you look at the jobs, you know, $80,000 to start for light field workers, and a really wonderful job, able to make 6 figures a year. We didn't have one single female line worker in the state. So that's, you know, again, if we can start working, this is the next challenge, the next mountain for us to climb, is to address the workforce challenges.
John? There you go.
There we go. Yeah, I certainly agree that, you know, this is something that we've considered, and certainly something that Northwest is concerned about. You know, I'm an advocate for it. I know that I've spoken with Senator Brock in the past regarding workforce development, and looking at the potential to have you know, vocational programs developed through VTC or technical centers. I think it's certainly we will all be pulling from the same bucket of qualified technicians and engineers, and it's, you know, the sooner we can fill that bucket, the better off we'll all be. Whether it's a CUD or not, it could be you know, operators, you know, even consulting firms and contractors in the area. We're all going to pull from the same buckets of folks. So you know, the sooner we can train up qualified technicians and engineers, the better off we'll all be.
I think I said Senator Sarachan and then Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn, and thank you for all your great work that you've done there. I want to ask a couple of questions about the affordability concept that you seem to have taken off the table any cross subsidization by your ratepayers. And it seems like we do that in the utility field quite a bit, whether it's Green Mountain Power or Vermont Gas or Lifeline, or even in broadband, whatever limited program some of the commercial people do. I think they're probably recouping that by charging higher rates for people who can afford it. You know, eventually, if we have a subsidy program of any kind, it comes out of taxpayers' pockets. You know, whether they pay higher taxes in Vermont to establish a fund, or whether it's ratepayers, and to make it more local to the particular utility is frequently a way to go. I understand your concern with your present bonds and how you have to meet those. I don't know whether they can be refinanced or will be refinanced at some point where the numbers may change. But is there no possibility in your mind whatsoever that there can't be any cross subsidization, at least in part, to meet the affordability challenge?
I'm not saying that we could never do that, you know, or even that. I mean, you know, in some ways, the $72 rate is kind of subsidized by our higher rate payers. That's the hard fact of how expensive it is to, you know, build these networks. But what I guess what I would say is that, you know, right now and for the foreseeable future, there's going to be this federal $50 a month subsidy if the household qualifies. And so that has actually simplified the ability for EC Fiber to think about there being, you know, a very large number of student households and expanding to people with telehealth needs and even remote work needs, you know, as time goes forward, because now the challenge is identifying those households and gaining their trust about agreeing to the service and using the existing federal system for qualifying people to affirm that they can get this subsidy.
Is that only for the categories you mentioned, or is there a low income element to that as well?
No, low income as well. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, we're starting to get down into the nitty gritty. But the only reason I can speak halfway intelligently about it is because Holly has done so much work with so many people in the social services area. And we've had a lot of discussions with people like Rizzy about how we can program something to tap into the federal database to, affirm that the people are in, and we can do this all in a way that, the staff working at EC Fiber doesn't need to know anything about why they qualified, right? And the social worker doesn't need to know anything about how the service actually gets delivered. So that once that's in place, I think that over time, it's going to be possible to identify lots of different ways of filling that gap. But I do think that for a public utility, they're going to want to really be able to identify how the revenue comes in and how the decision is made about whether or not what kind of subsidy it offers. And I think that for right now, for this period in EC Fiber's development, we've decided it's better to make a donation to a third party as opposed to figuring it out internally.
Yeah, I might add to that too. This is about changing our economic future. If we're on an economic downturn long term, we have less revenue to work with. If we build this fiber network and Vermont becomes a high intellectual capital business area, then of course our revenues increase and therefore we can do more. So I think at the highest level, this is about flipping Vermont's economy moving forward, which gives you the opportunity to do more because you have more revenues. So you can look at it two ways. You can tighten your belts forever till you have no belt left to tighten, or you can figure out how to increase the revenue side.
Arnie. And then I think we ought to think about wrapping up.
Yeah, Senator Sorokin asked my question I was going to ask about affordability. So I just have one comment, except for I've forgotten it because I'm so tired. So I'll just stop there.
Okay. I think we're all tired. Thank you, committee. We haven't done into the evening in a while, but I think as we start feeling the pressure to get these bills out, we'll do it again. I did communicate with Representative Marcotte and about our insurance bill. It's sitting in rules in the Senate. However, House Healthcare, who has jurisdiction over health insurance, is taking testimony tomorrow. Representative Marcotte intends to vote the insurance housekeeping out on Friday and ship it to House Healthcare so that they can add whatever they decide to do on that bill, which means it should come back to us. So there is hope on that bill. So with that, thank you all. Thank you, witnesses, for hanging in there. This has been a long day, and we'll see you all tomorrow.